Hi, everybody, and welcome to our monthly free public education webinar on wireless risks and safer technology solutions. My name is Cece Doucette, and I am the Director of Massachusetts for Safe Technology. And I am so delighted to have with us two residents of New Mexico. We have Arlene Sanchez and her husband, Kevin Lorenzen. And they have had a most unusual, but perhaps becoming too common experience with today's exposure to man-made radio frequency radiation and high levels of electromagnetic fields. So Kevin, I'm going to go ahead and put the spotlight on you for a moment. And
Okay.
if you can share with us how you and your lovely wife, Arlene, came to know about wireless tech. And Arlene, you and Kevin are such great partners. You can sort out who wants to talk when.
All right. You want me to start, honey?
Yes.
Okay. So I am not affected by EMFs, or at least not to the point where it's affecting me in my daily life. But Arlene started to get affected several years ago, and she was driving an automobile. It was a hybrid automobile. And one day she got to the point where she literally could not drive the car any longer. She got out, she called me and said, "Something is wrong with this car. My brain is burning. I feel like I'm having a heart attack." So I drove down, we swapped cars, and then we started doing a lot of research, trying to find out what is causing this situation. Well, turns out, I mean, we were actually very fortunate. We were able to determine in about 6 months that she was suffering from the effects of EMF, that she was EHS. I know for a lot of people, that's kind of light speeds. Many people take years before they ever figure it out. Many of will go through tens of doctors, maybe even 100 or more doctors in order to get diagnoses that just don't seem to come because the doctors just aren't that familiar with it. So we were pretty fortunate that we were able to determine that. We are both from a essentially engineering or technology background. So I have a 25-year career in semiconductors, retired from that. But I worked for a little company back in the 80s, which now I don't know if I'm happy to say that, but I worked for Motorola when we rolled cell phones out. So 41 years ago, next month, well, almost. So September 21st of 83 is when they came out. So I was an engineer, actually worked in the RF, radio frequency RF wafer fab. We made the devices that went into cell phones. Didn't know anything about the technology and how it worked or operated or how it impacted people back then. Now we know. So getting back to Arlene, when we finally figured out that she was suffering from EHS, we then started to do a lot of research on our house and found that we had dirty electricity, so we were able to put filters in. We found that there were areas in our house that were wired improperly. So, when the contractors were doing it, they were ganging neutrals, just doing whatever they could to shortcut it, make it easy on them, cost less, which ultimately had an impact on us, right? All of us, right? Electrical fields, magnetic fields that were coming through the walls. So we rewired part of our house. We moved away from a Wi-Fi router and went to a wired router. We went to a wired phone, so we got rid of the decked phones. So we've done just about everything we possibly could. We did get rid of Arlene's car and got rid of that one. And she now drives proudly a 2013 Chevy Tahoe, which is mostly pre-tech, so very, very limited tech in it. We also had every single window, including the windshield, covered in an RF shielding material. So we were able to determine where we actually got the windows done. There was a cell tower directly across the street from the window tinting facility. I worked with the owner of it to get the materials so that we can get it done. And the cell tower directly across the street was kicking out about 500,000 microwatts per square meter of signal strength continuously. So when we would get in the car and I showed it to him, he was floored because we dropped the signal strength in the automobile by more than 2 orders of magnitude. So it went from 500,000 to we were seeing about 300 to 500. So it was really pretty impressive. And that helps Arlene if she has to drive her automobile anywhere. So we've made huge changes just in how we do everything, right? How we live in our home, how we live our lives. Arlene was working in a tech company and ended up having to go on disability because The company was completely set up with wireless routers everywhere. She would go in to cook her lunch, and she would be in a kitchen area that had about 8 to 10 microwaves, and there would literally be people in lines waiting to heat their lunch. And so they were all heating their lunches and cooking themselves at the same time. So we learned an awful lot about EHS. We were fortunate enough to make contact with the local newspaper here in Albuquerque. So the Albuquerque Journal, it's actually available. So if people want to look at it, but they did a whole article on Arlene, plus a friend of ours who we got to be friends with, whose son was young, 31 years old, suffering from EHS. And unfortunately, he took his own life because he couldn't handle the pain and the thought of having to live an entire life without any kind of contact or being able to work or do anything or have fun. So the Albuquerque Journal did an article that's available. They also did a podcast. So I did kind of a technical discussion on EHS and just how it affects people and what's causing it in the environment. And so that's also on the ABQ Journal Tech Pods. So that's kind of our journey for the last 3.5, almost 4 years now.
Yeah, it's incredible to hear that two very highly qualified professionals at the top of the game in their own, fields can just get taken down in an instant when you hit that tipping point on wireless radiation. So we're so grateful to everybody who's taken the time today to join us.
Yes.
And we'll spend about the next hour and a half. Hang on, let me play with the spotlight again. I wonder if it'll let me spotlight myself here. So we're grateful for everybody to take the time to join us today so that we can all continue to learn together. And I want to say right up front that we're going to go through a set of slides. And once our webinar is finished in the next day or so, I will be sending out the recording. And anybody is welcome to share that with whomever they would like to introduce this conversation to. And we will go ahead and get going. Arlene, was there anything that you wanted to contribute to what Kevin said before we move on?
I worked with a tech company and his wife too. She bought a car.
Sorry, that's I was deferring to Arlene. Can everybody else please mute?
Car or something.
Oh, here we go. I think I got her.
He checked it out, did a lot of
Oh,
research. It took him a
not
while.
yet. Somebody's talking in the background.
She was the MSF to DHS. But she
Hang
had
on.
the ability,
I'll be able to find that.
tech companies. And they changed everything in their house like we did, except that they also found
There we go. Sorry, Julie, but thank you for telling people in the background what you're up to. Okay, Arlene, was there anything that you wanted to add?
No, the only thing I would say, which was, I think you asked me in our last conversation, like, what would you tell people based on what I've learned so far? And it is that you have to listen to your body. I think our bodies are very smart. I had all the signs that I had EHS, but I didn't know it was even a thing. So now that we're becoming educated, it's easier to get help and to get diagnosed and to make mitigation plans, but listen to your body.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And we're going to go ahead and talk about the science in just a few minutes so people know what symptoms to really be on the lookout for. So let me go ahead and resume the spotlight on my end. I know you guys can probably see it all right. Okay, I'm going to go into screen share and we're going to go through my slides. And for those who just joined, please know that in the coming days, I will be sending out my slides along with the recording of our program here today. All right, let's go ahead and get started here. So again, my name is Cece Doucette. I'm the Director of Massachusetts for Safe Technology and the Education Services Director for a little nonprofit called Safer Tech Education. That MTPW after my name just means that I had the privilege of earning a master's in technical and professional writing from Northeastern University, where I earned my undergraduate in communication studies, never ever guessing that I would be using my speaking and writing skill set to do technology safety. But I'm very grateful that this is what my background has prepared me for. So when my daughters were in public schools here in Ashland, Massachusetts, that was at the time when we kept hearing about this 21st century classroom campaign that the ed tech or wireless industry was heavily promoting to our schools. And we are in a small community. We don't have deep budgets. Our budgets have been cut year after year after year, and we certainly didn't have the funding for what we were being told our kids would need to succeed in the world. So, good to be parents. We raised our hands. We started doing fundraising. We got revenue to put wireless infrastructure into our schools, to get iPads, to get Chromebooks, to get smart boards, to get minis, to get Apple TV, and all this other wireless tech that we were being told was critically important. And then one night at book group, a girlfriend of mine who's an electrical engineer was reading a book called Zapped by Anne Louise Gittleman. And Wendy had chronic Lyme disease, as did all 4 of her children. And so Wendy hits issues systematically, and she was going through what all the environmental exposures could be that were taking her family down. And this is when she discovered electromagnetic radiation or wireless radiation has a very serious biological effect. And she mentioned something to us at book group, and it was book group, and that's not what we were reading that night. So I just made a mental note of it. And then not too long after that, something crossed my desk that inferred the same thing. And it was the American Academy of Environmental Medicine. Now, these are the doctors who get the conundrum cases that regular doctors have not been trained on. And this American Academy of Environmental Medicine had put out a position statement back in 2012, warning our school superintendents not to allow wireless technology into our schools. And I thought, wow, that's a pretty powerful statement. Maybe I ought to look into this. So I thought, is there any science? And we're going to walk you through the science in just a few minutes, but I was astounded to find literally thousands of peer-reviewed studies all over the world showing extensive harm from wireless radiation. So I raised my voice at my schools and I just said, hey guys, I think we got something to look at here. And I got back crickets. Nobody even responded. So then I started sending more information about what I was finding. And ultimately, the school committee chairwoman, Lori Tosti, and I started sharing information back and forth. Like, did you know that France took wireless out of their public libraries years ago because of the potential risk from biological harm? And then did you see that Israel and Belgium and, pockets in Italy were taking wireless technology out of the schools? So we shared information back and forth. It was not an easy conversation to have because most people, especially those in the professions like engineers and physicists and even doctors, we had a veterinarian in our community, all of them just wanted our kids to have the best that we could afford to give them. And most had only been taught you have to have heat from a radiating device to have any kind of harm. That's what our government guidelines are based on, is heat. So they allow this much radiation, but the science is showing heat's important, but there are so many biological effects happening way below that heat or thermal threshold, like hundreds of thousands of times below what our government still allows today. So I started sharing all of the science, and I would get up to the podium and speak in front of my school committee. And ultimately, it wasn't easy, but we did become the first in the nation to have this little sign hanging in our classrooms with best practices for mobile devices. And we caution, turn off these devices when you're not using them. You don't want to have a whole cart of Chromebooks sitting there pulsating microwave radiation all over the classroom. you don't want to have the wireless access point on the ceiling pulsating radiation all the time. So we did this, and little did I know, we were the first in the nation to do this back in 2014. So as I got further and further into the science, I started meeting with my legislators, and Senate President Karen Spilka here in Massachusetts had served with me on our local education board. And so I reached out to her and I said, Karen, I think we've got something on par with big tobacco here. I said, is there anything that you can do from where you sit to help us sort this out? So I met with her, and I met with her district director during local coffee hour in our community. And I took a radiation measurement device and I measured her cell phone and I measured her district director's laptop, and both devices flew right off the charts into the red alarm extreme end of the spectrum on my meter. And they're both looking at me like, really? And I said, yes, and nobody knows. What can we do? So she put me together with an attorney in her office. And at that time, she wasn't our Senate president, but she was the chairwoman of the Senate Ways and Means Committee, which is a very high-powered position. Now, Senator Spilka goes completely by the book, so I wasn't looking for any favoritism. I was just looking for somebody above me to look at this issue and help guide what we can do. So this attorney and I put together a very simple bill that would say, let's form a commission at the state level, get the right minds together at the table, look at the facts, and decide what to do. That was back in 2014. It's now been 10 years, and we have had more than 20 bills introduced in Massachusetts. And granted, we've gotten them out of committee from time to time. And I didn't know what any of this meant because I'd never been involved in the political process before, but it goes to the first, well, first they have to say, the House and the Senate, yeah, we agree that this bill can be introduced. So we cleared that hurdle. And then it got assigned to the Joint Committee on Public Health. And I went and testified with them. You only get 3 minutes. And as I'm holding up the science, and I'm holding up Ashland's little sign, and I'm holding up my radiation meter, I could tell that not one person on the Joint Committee on Public Health in Massachusetts even know this issue existed. And so I thought, wow, 3 minutes isn't really going to cut it. So I spent years going to the State House and meeting with every legislative office that had a hand on one of these bills. And lo and behold, the Joint Committee on Public Health reported my first bill out favorably. And I was congratulated. People said in Massachusetts, you know, a bill almost never makes any movement in the first session that it's introduced. And others would take me aside and say, good luck to you, kid, because if it went in under your name instead of directly sponsored by a legislator, it ain't going nowhere. But because on this crazy journey, I've had the privilege of connecting with world-leading scientists and doctors, and sadly, far too many people who have been injured or lost their loved ones to microwave sicknesses. Being a tech writer, I just came up with a template and asked everybody to please send in testimony so that we can educate our legislators. And we actually, that first session, got my bill reported out favorably. But then it goes to the next committee, which was Healthcare Finance. And I was told they are not introducing anything new right now because the finances are so tight. So we persist, we continue to introduce those bills. But we had an amazing experience with a legislator in New Hampshire, with great thanks to the citizen whose name is Deb Hodgson. Now, Deb is a retired accountant, and she started getting very sick and having all these seemingly unrelated symptoms with forgetting where she was in her community that she had been driving around in for 40 years. Can't sleep, feeling anxious, depressed, headaches, nosebleeds, you know, all this constellation of symptoms. And when she was going to go off of Coumadin, she knew that wireless could affect the blood. So she went and did her research and decided, I'm going to make our house a sanctuary. And so lo and behold, she figured out how to get the wireless out of her home and just connect back through cables. And all of her symptoms resolved in a very short amount of time. So she spoke to her state representative, Patrick Abrami, about this and told him what this was. And now he's an engineer and he'd only been taught you have to have heat to have harm. So Rep. Abrami starts doing his own independent research and has this major wow moment, like, what are we doing here? So Deb and Rep. Abrami get in his car and they drive down from New Hampshire to my house in Massachusetts, and we sit around my kitchen table for the afternoon and we help him to connect the dots on what this radiation issue is. And he wrote a really good bill up in New Hampshire, and we'll show you a bit about what that did too. So lots of good things are happening behind the scenes right now, but we just don't hear about it in mainstream media because it's owned by the same corporations that are promoting these toxic products. So here is our nonprofit that we're now rebranding. It was initially called Wireless Education, and we want to get the focus off of wireless. We want to focus on safer tech education. So we're about to relaunch our course. Dr. Mikko Ahonen out of Finland is one of the world's leading scientists in this space. And he and I have created a course that can be completed in about 1 hour online. And it will teach you the science, the risks, what other countries are doing, because we are way behind the 8 ball here in North America. And most importantly, like we're going to do today, we're going to teach you what you can do under your own power to have safer technology deployment like today. So if anybody works for a company or works for a school or works for a municipality or just wants to have their whole family educated on this, you can literally take this course online in about an hour. We keep the price very low. It's about the cost of a movie ticket because we want it to be affordable, but we still have overhead costs that we have to pay. So please feel free to check out our little course at Safer Tech Education. And then when I was down there testifying at the State House, I started bumping into other people who knew about this issue. And then Dr. Deborah Davis, who's a Nobel Peace Prize co-laureate on climate change, she started getting involved with this issue. And she brought a panel of world-leading experts to the Massachusetts State House to ask for right-to-know legislation and to support the bills that we had. And I went to this forum, and there's this Nobel Peace Prize co-laureate. Then there's Frank Clegg, who's the retired president of Microsoft Canada, speaking out about this issue. And I'm sitting there going, whoa, there's a captain of industry here, really? And then there was this Dr. Sharma from the Indian government in India. And he and his team have done many of the scientific studies that show great biological harm. And then there was Dr. Catherine Steiner Adair, who wrote a book called The Big Disconnect, and she lectures all over the world on what age by age this immersion in technology is doing to the detriment of the development of our children. So we had really top of the line experts in a standing room only forum at our State House. So I began connecting with a bunch of other people around the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And ultimately we formed Massachusetts for Safe Technology. So anybody is welcome to go out and pound around in my website. We try to use language and light and color that is not, dark and, scare tactics and all of that. We want to focus on solutions. So let's keep with the light. And feel free to go out there and learn what we've been doing here. Then somebody down at the National Institutes of Health found my work, and they asked me if I would co-chair the technology panel for the Health in Buildings Roundtable Conference. This is a national conference where people from industry, government, healthcare associations, architects, urban planners, all these incredible people come together to say, in the built environment, what do we need to be doing to make sure it's healthy? And so this was the first time that many of these national organizations were hearing about wireless technology being a biological risk factor. So it was just what an honor to be asked to go down there. And then even more so to have Frank Clegg from Microsoft Canada fly in on his own time and dime and present to us what he's learned and to say industry can absolutely do better if given a nudge. And in this 10-year journey that I've been on, while it's important to educate all these upper echelons, nothing's really going to change until the public gets educated and starts speaking up. And then somewhere we're going to meet in the middle. So that's why we love to share these kinds of resources. So this link to the NIH conference is a really highly credible one. All of our talks were under 10 minutes. And in addition to Frank Clegg, we had Dr. Martin Pall, P-A-L-L, who's one of the world's leading scientists on this. And for years, the industry got away with saying, oh, there's no mechanism of harm identified in the science, so let's just keep doing what we're doing. Well, Dr. Pall was able to represent the scientists who have identified many mechanisms of harm, and we're going to tell you about that today, too. And then we had Peter Sullivan on our panel. And Peter, in his younger career, was a fighter pilot for our government, you know, kind of like Top Gun. So he's up there way up high with the Earth's very high levels of natural electromagnetic radiation inside of a fighter plane that has radar all over the outside of it, because that's what this technology came from, was our military as radar. And then he's got all the instrumentation communicating wirelessly back to the terrestrial base station on land, right? So poor Peter got walloped with natural and man-made electromagnetic radiation. And then after he left the military service, he was an engineer and he went to work in Silicon Valley. So it was like his friends who invented cell phones and a lot of the technology we use today. And Peter started getting really sick. He dropped down to a very unhealthy weight. His teeth started getting brittle and breaking off. And he started doing the deep dive into what could do this. And he also had 2 sons. And when each of his little boys came into the preschool years, both of them wound up on the autism spectrum. So Peter today, knowing what he knows, will tell us that we really need to pay attention to this issue and that there is always hope. Now, biologically, you and I and every other species on the planet is individual and very different. So we don't want to overpromise anything, but when Peter decided to clean up his environment for his family, they did the digital detox, and you start with like 12 hours at night where there's no radio frequency radiation in your home. And by taking all these healthy measures, you know, doing the chemical detox out of their bodies, and he went so far as to do the heavy metal detox on his sons and himself. And today, both of his sons are grown men. They both went to college. Neither one of them are on the autism spectrum anymore. And I went, what? I didn't even know that was an option. But apparently there's something called de novo mutations, which means it didn't come from mom's bloodline. It didn't come from dad. It came from somewhere in the environment. And when you start to clean up the environment, we see really remarkable things happen. So again, we don't want to overpromise, but we want to really underscore that getting rid of the man-made radio frequency and dirty electricity in your environment can often contribute to what some would call a miracle, but it's really just getting back to our natural levels of electromagnetic radiation. So if you have somebody, you know your audience, if you have scientists, if you have, doctors, physicists, chemists, anybody who has been trained that you only have to have heat to have harm, please welcome them to look at this series of videos, because all of our talks were held to 10 minutes or less. So it's a quick way to really get a highly credible ear on what this issue is. Now, one of the gaps that we had when I fell down the rabbit hole a decade ago is that we could tell that so many people were suffering from these illnesses and their doctors hadn't been trained. And so they were getting misdiagnosed. And so today we are so blessed to have professional training available online for people to take on their own time. And today there is no cost for this training. We had the EMF, or Electromagnetic Fields, medical conference back in 2021. And it was accredited for 24.5 continuing education credits, as well as 24.5 CEs for nurses. And that opportunity expired a year ago, July. But once the credits were no longer available, Elizabeth Kelly, who's the executive director of the conference, she took the entire conference online and put it out there for everybody to get professionally trained by world-leading doctors, scientists, building biologists, attorneys who are working on this. I was so honored to be able to speak at the conference on state and local policy, and there were other advocates also who spoke in this space. So just know that although some of us are just coming into this conversation right now, we have so many incredible resources at your fingertips today that you can just take and run with. So that's my story and how I got involved in this issue. And, you know, I brought this toxin into my children's school. So some days I just want to curl up in a ball and never look at it again. I want to head for the hills. I keep saying tiny house in the woods. But until we actually have meaningful action on this, I can't just walk away, because we are all morally obliged to protect, especially our children. So that's why I do what I do here. All right, so what made my schools decide to even put this little sign up in our classrooms with baby steps toward precaution? I think it was when they read the legal fine print. So for anybody who's with us today who has an iPhone, I welcome you to go into settings, and I'm going to walk you through where that is. I know that our co-host today, Kevin, uses an Android or a Google phone, and he may be able to drop into the chat how to find it in that platform. Anybody can just go, you know, do a search on their make and model of phone and type in RF exposure. That's radio frequency, man-made energy that pulses these electromagnetic fields of microwaves. So we hear this issue called by many things. It's called electromagnetic fields or electromagnetic radiation. It's called radio frequency radiation. It's called microwave radiation, but it's really the focus on man-made energies that were brought to market with no safety testing. So our friends at the Environmental Health Trust, which is the organization that this Nobel Prize co-laureate Dr. Deborah Davis founded, they have a page called See the Fine Print, where we can look at a bunch of these fine print disclaimers, including the iPad used to have something in there telling us to watch out for seizures and blackouts and eye strain. And who knew? It's been in there all along. So let's take a look inside our iPhones. From settings, scroll down just a little bit and hit General. From General, go all the way down to the bottom and hit Legal and Regulatory. When you hit that, on the next screen, about 4 down, see it there, RF exposure. So settings, general, legal and regulatory, and RF exposure. When we read the legal fine print that came with all of our wireless devices, they've been warning us all along. This device was tested at a distance from the body. So when you hold it, while it's radiating, when you tuck it in your bra, when you put it in your yoga pants, when you stick it in your back pocket, when you put it in your suit pocket or your shirt pocket, with those antennas transmitting, you are exceeding the Federal Communications Commission's guidelines. We don't even have standards. They're just guidelines for public radiation exposure levels. And as we'll see in a few minutes, those levels were never safety tested, and the FCC has now been sued for ignoring 11,000 pages of evidence of harm entered into the public record. So if you read a little further in that fine print, they give you some advice. They say to reduce your exposure, basically, once you know, don't touch something that's radiating. They say to use a hands-free option, like speakerphone, and distance is certainly your friend, or a headset. And I'm going to pause my screen share for just a moment and give you a couple of demonstrations. So just know, for everything we have messed up with wireless, the solutions exist today to use our technology much more safely. So for the headsets, one of the properties of this microwave radiation is it amplifies around metal. So if you're using a traditional headset and you're plugging a wire into your device and then plugging the other end into your brain, the radiation is just going to go woohoo, party on up to the brain, and it's going to travel right up there and pull in, you know, all the radiation that's around you too. So really bad idea to put anything connected to radiation on your brain. Earbuds, no, don't use them. You're putting a transmitter on this side of your head, this side of your head, and it's actively communicating with wherever you've shoved that device. So a better option would be to look for something called a hollow tube headset. It still plugs in, comes up to some pretty good acoustic controls here for muting and audio, you know, all of that. And then notice these two little ferrite beads. They block the radiation from this point on. And then the acoustics, kind of like a doctor's stethoscope, go right up into your head. And it's just a rubber tip there. There's no metal coming up to your brain. So look for a hollow tube or an air tube headset. And there are companies out there like less EMF, electromagnetic fields, right? lessemf.com. There's Tech Wellness, there's Shield Your Body. These guys have all proven to be highly above board and have your best interest at heart. So just know, if we broke it, we have ways to fix it today. The other thing that had me really puzzled when I fell down this rabbit hole was, if this toxin's invisible, how do we even know that we're being radiated, right? And then I learned there are radio frequency detection meters on the market. This is about a $400 device. It's called the Safe and Sound Pro 2. And this is the very device that was recommended at the EMF medical conference. And now doctors are purchasing this, putting it in their practice. I know one doctor here in Massachusetts who loans it to her patients for $10, so they all share the cost, and says, okay, 2 hours, go home, do your scavenger hunt, write down what you found, what device was radiating and at what levels, and then bring it on back, and I'm going to teach you what to do. So it's critically important to have a radio frequency device, because with 5G and the Internet of Things, and we'll teach you more about that, they are projecting that every house is going to have 200 wirelessly connected devices for 5G and the Internet of Things, which was never biologically safety tested before they brought it to market. So it's just madness once you understand just how harmful this is. So I want to show you after I stopped circling my tails, and it took me a few months before I went, you know what? Step up. You're the mom. It's your job to protect your family. So I circled my tail, and one by one, I identified everything radiating in my home, and I figured it out. And we're going to teach you solutions today too. But look at this. I am in this nice flashing green area on my meter, and that's as low as I can get it to, but it's green. So in the scientific literature, the goal is to be at 10 microwatts per square meter or less of this radiation. So basically in like 3 feet of air, how much radiation? The goal is to be at 10 or less. Right now, sitting here talking to you on my amazing hardwired computer with no antennas in my house turned on, I'm at 2 microwatts per square meter, and we want to be under 10. So, you know, good on me, but more importantly, good on all those experts who taught me what to do, because I stand on the shoulders of giants, and just my happy place is teaching people about this. So I'm going to take my cell phone out of airplane mode, and I'm going to show you what happens when all this comes back online. So this one device has multiple antennas. It has a cellular and data antenna. It has a Bluetooth antenna. It has a Wi-Fi antenna, a locator, and a hotspot. And this is an iPhone 7. And hang on. Whoa, baby. Okay, let me go back into airplane mode because it got really loud. Come on. All right, so I'm hitting airplane mode. And that disabled the cellular and the data. I'm gonna go look in my settings and see if it disabled the Bluetooth and the Wi-Fi. Yep, my Bluetooth and Wi-Fi both say off. If it says on yours not connected, remember this is two-way microwave radiation. So it's coming from your device to connect with a cell tower out there that will then transmit signal back and forth. So if it just says not connected, that's not good enough because it's still going, hello, here I am, hello, I want to, hello. So you really just want to go in and hit that button and go off to your Bluetooth and to your Wi-Fi. In the Androids and Google phones, you just got to check. They may all go off when you go into airplane mode. But again, if I didn't know to measure, I would think I was safe when I'm still getting radiated. So back to our little device here. It flew off the charts into the extreme flashing red when I turned my cell phone on and all those antennas came back online. Now, I only have an iPhone 7. For me, it's really a glorified camera and clock and alarm. Everything that's on your device is there for you to enjoy. You don't have to be sending signal back and forth to use your clock, your camera, your alarms, or anything you've downloaded. It's there. It's not good for your eyes to stare at a tiny screen for any length of time. We now have an epidemic of myopia because people's eyes are getting misshapen. But we were at 2 in my house before I turned that cell phone back on. I wasn't even doing anything. It was just all these antennas radiating. We went from 2 microwatts per square meter to 3,180,000. 3,180,000 microwatts per square meter. That's the highest that this particular device can capture. Might have even been higher, but we know scientifically we need to be at 10 or less, not 10,000, but 10. So that's why it's critically important to have a meter. And I'm going to go back into my screen share now to give you some ideas for what we can all think about doing in our own communities. So these last bullets here, I am kind of solutions oriented. You know, I thought, well, let's get our legislature to get in on this. Let's start working on it. Let's get our schools working on this. And then I thought, now that we know there are meters, why don't we put one in our library and the whole community can borrow it? That again was not an easy conversation to have. I had to go through 3 grant cycles with our local board of select persons, which is like our city council. I had to educate them one by one in their homes, in my home, out in the community. So I did a lot of education around this. And then we became the first in the United States to put one of these meters on loan in our public library. And this was the acoustimeter that I got on loan back in 2019 or 2016. And it's a great meter. This one is the one that I just gave a demonstration with. Either one is fine, but I prefer today the Safe and Sound Pro 2 because it's got some additional features in it, like you could plug it in with an adapter and just plug it into the wall. So if you are electrically sensitive and somebody walks into your house, you could just leave this meter running and it will signal that somebody's walked in with something that's about to make you sick. So, so I started this in my library and I started telling people about it. And then others started going to their library and saying, hey, with almost every library reinventing themselves today, because not everybody comes to check out books anymore. Most of our libraries now have a library of things, games, puzzles. Let's see. My daughter's waiting for a power washer from her library. There are metal detectors. You can borrow it and take it out to the beach. There's disc golf, you know, all these cool things for the community to borrow. So it's not a big ask right now to say, can we please also invest $400 and get the Safe and Sound Pro 2? I caution against getting lesser quality meters because they may miss some of the signals. Somebody notified me that there's like a GQ 390 or something that only costs $100. And somebody borrowed it from their library and then we put it up against the better quality meter and indeed it was missing some really important signals out there. So if you can, either donate one directly to your library. If your library has funding, that's great. Or if maybe they can only afford $200 or none at all, have them reach out to the Environmental Health Trust. They have a grant fund that will allow you to have your librarian contact them. You can't contact them, your librarian has to contact them, but they will make sure that your town gets one of these meters to put on loan. So solutions at every turn, and seeing is really believing. Now, I mentioned that most of our mainstream media outlets have been bought up and bought up and bought up by the same 4 to 6 mega conglomerations that control the messaging that we get through mainstream media. And they own these companies that are putting these environmental toxins out there. So we just don't get the information through mainstream media, which is why I'm so happy to help you connect the dots here, because I'm going to send you my slides, and don't take my word on any of it. But if anything that I'm sharing here helps you to start your own investigation, then we're honored to help you save that time. One of the last bastions of independent reporting in our communities are our cable stations, and our local station, WACA-TV, has been so good to me over the years. They've done a lot of public service announcements with me. And this 23-minute public service announcement is a video of them coming into my house, and I turned on all the wireless and I showed what all the exposures are, and then I made suggestions for how to mitigate. So that was a good one. It's, already 10,000 people have benefited from that one. And then I was brought in by an activist here named Patricia Burke to go out to Worcester, Massachusetts, to their cable station and be a guest on a show there to talk about utility smart meters. And we'll teach you more about that too. But eventually that station manager said, Cece, you just need to have your own show. And I went, yeah? And he said, yeah. And I thought, cool. The more the merrier. If I can get more messaging out there, it's my honor and privilege to go out there every couple of weeks and tape a new episode with doctors, with scientists, and with citizens who now have a forum to tell their stories. So if you have a story to tell, please reach out to me, and I would love to do a 28-minute interview with you. So we're up to, I think, 37 interviews so far. And our co-hosts today, Arlene and Kevin from New Mexico, were my most recent guests. Okay, so use your local resources. Your cable stations love to hear from citizens to say, I have an idea for a program. You can bring me in for an interview. We can do it on Zoom. It's easy peasy. Okay, so why do we even care about this issue? Let's bring it right back to the science. First, we're going to look at the long-term effects, and on the next slide, we'll look at stuff that people are experiencing in the short term. So for years, as I mentioned, the industry said, oh, there's no mechanism of harm. Let's just keep doing what we're doing. Well, more than 20 years ago, our Food and Drug Administration commissioned a study with the U.S. National Toxicology Program, which is arguably one of the world's leading toxics researchers. Some consider them the gold standard. They did a 20-year study expecting to prove that cell phones are safe. And instead, they found harm. And they had an unprecedented 3-day peer review at the National Institutes of Health with world-leading experts whose life work is investigating this man-made microwave radiation. And at the end of the day, they determined clear evidence of cancerous tumors. Clear evidence is the highest of 5 categories they could assign. Clear evidence of cancerous tumors in the Schwann cells around the heart, and additional evidence for acoustic neuromas, for thyroid issues, and more. And that should have triggered public policy, but it didn't. And the industry gets a hold of these good studies, and they'll go, oh, that's just one study. You need more for anything to mean anything. Well, right on the heels of our $30 million study here in the US, the Ramazzini Institute in Italy completed another large study. Ours was on cell phones. Theirs was on the cell tower base stations. So now we've got this science coming from both ends of the two-way transmissions. And guess what they found at the Ramazzini Institute? DNA damage, cancers, and so on. It corroborated everything that we found here. So we don't need more science. We need an educated public who's going to learn about this, speak up about it, to help empower our government agencies to step out of the shadows and finally do the right thing. So child and adult cancers, DNA damage, which is the foundation for building a proper anything from a child to a plant to a pollinator to a tree and any other biome on the planet. It was the infertility studies when I started reading them that got me on my feet. And I learned that they've taken male human sperm, they've exposed it to a laptop with the antennas radiating, and it changed the DNA, it slowed the motility of the sperm, and it caused programmed cell death, apoptosis, which means it was killing off the sperm in 4 hours of exposure. 4 hours. And I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. I had just sent my oldest daughter up to college with her MacBook. Our youngest had just gone into high school, and we thought we'd give her a leg up and gave her a laptop for Christmas. And where both my girls using them, but right on top of their reproductive organs. And now, that was a decade ago. We have even more and more studies that have repeated the study. So the science is very solid. Kaiser Permanente has an undisputed study about women's fertility and higher miscarriage rates for women who are using radio frequency transmitting devices. And then neurotoxicity. So we were already at epidemic levels of anxiety and depression before the pandemic because we've been eating toxic foods, we have been pulsating ourselves with microwaves, and now we have very good scientists speaking up about this. Dr. Hugh Taylor runs the OBGYN program at Yale Medical School. And he has a program called the Baby Safe Project. And for anybody with loved ones having babies, you should send them over to the Baby Safe Project. There is a beautiful 3-minute video that talks about choices that parents are actively making today to hardwire their houses and get this radiation out so they can give their developing child and fetus the best benefit that they can. So when Dr. Taylor was doing rodent experiments in the lab, he found that after radiating those pregnant mice for, I think it was like 9 hours a day, when the pups were born, they came out exhibiting behavior much like a child with ADD or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, literally bouncing off the walls of the cage, not a care in the world, unable to concentrate. And then Dr. Martha Herbert founded the Autism Lab at Massachusetts General Hospital, and she saw huge connections between these environmental exposures, and she knows scientifically what's happening in the microwave radiation spectrum and what's happening in the spectrum of the children and now adults that were in her care in the Autism Lab and her medical practice. She's a Harvard pediatric neurologist. And then there's Alzheimer's. Kind of like with cancer, these diseases used to take decades to develop. And now, as Dr. Martin Pall has written papers up on this, he's culled the science on Alzheimer's and sees that not only is this happening to people in their 90s and 80s, it's now happening to people in their 70s, 60s, 50s, 40s, 30s, and even in some cases, people in their 20s are getting diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's. So we can't just keep polluting our cells and the environment of the brain and expect that we're going to have outcomes that we had 2 decades ago. We are biologically in a major shift right now if we don't get ahead of this. Now, I mentioned that we don't get good information through mainstream media, so it's so heartening when well-known groups like the Environmental Working Group get resources to start reporting out on this. And the Environmental Working Group has been doing just that for a number of years. Here's a fact sheet that they put out on protecting kids from wireless radiation in schools and at home. And then they've got another one here on the damage that it's doing to our nervous system and the neurotoxicity we discussed. So know your audience. If You know, for example, when I'm raising my kids, I knew that Environmental Working Group had these fact sheets that they put out every year. One was called the Clean 15 and the Dirty Dozen. And it's all about the pesticides in our foods. What foods can you maybe get away with having been grown commercially, and which ones should you really try and get grown organically because of all the pesticides and herbicides and other toxins that are grown there. So if you know people who trust the Environmental Working Group, give them these fact sheets. And children are especially vulnerable. They are not just little adults. Their skulls are still developing. They're much thinner than yours and mine. Their brains have a higher water content. And so when they get microwaved, it's actually doing more damage to them than it is to you and I. And with great thanks to Dr. Om Gandhi and some of his fellow scientists, they were able to model just how much radiation is getting pulsated into our brains. These head models are turned sideways where the yellow dot is the ear. When an adult puts that cell phone up to our brain, it is penetrating our brain, pulsing us with microwaves about 1/3 of the way through. On a 10-year-old child, it's going about 3/4 of the way into that child's brain. And on a 5-year-old child, it's penetrating almost the entire brain. So we have got to step up, come out of our comfort zone, learn about this, and do everything in our power today to start protecting these kids. So those are many of the long-term effects. And then in the short term, a lot of people will recognize these symptoms we're about to review and do something about it. And it's so gratifying when they come back and say, Cece, I did not want to know about this. I live on my devices. It's how I run my life. But my goodness, I recognize so many of those symptoms, and I took a chance and I took your advice and I created a sleep sanctuary as a first step so that my body could cell repair at night. And oh my gosh, I slept through the night for the first time in ages, or my children's behavior issues calmed way down when we stopped jackhammering them with microwaves 24/7. So short-term effects, please know that the Americans with Disabilities Act has long since recognized these electromagnetic sensitivities, and they offer recommendations for accommodations in the work setting. So we're not making this stuff up. Others know about it. The gap is in getting people to learn about it. So insomnia. You know how the industry said, oh, there's no mechanisms of harm identified in the scientific literature. Well, now we have cancers. Now we have infertility. Now we have neurotoxicity. And now we know what's going on for a lot of people with insomnia. So in the wee hours of darkness, because we are light beings, meaning that our biological systems operate off of the 24-hour light and dark circadian rhythm. In the wee hours of darkness, the pineal gland in the brain, and that's about as scientific as I'll get, the pineal gland in the brain releases melatonin to regulate our sleep and to help escort the toxins out of our body. When we leave this man-made invisible light energy form pulsating at us all the time, the brain's over there saying, hey, the lights are on. When's it going to get dark so I can release that melatonin? So we find that when we leave these invisible lights on, we are doing ourselves a big disservice because we're disabling our body's mechanism to keep us healthy with our sleep and with detoxifying. So that's one of them. And then headaches, stabbing, searing headaches, migraines that your doctors can't figure out, nosebleeds and ear bleeds seemingly out of the blue, fatigue that you just can't get over the hump and feel good anymore, pain from unidentified sources. So we now know another mechanism of harm, and it's called rouleau formation. In my little brain, rouleau sounds a lot like Rolos, which are those caramel chocolates that get stacked up in a sleeve. Well, that's not too far apart from what's happening with rouleau formation. So in a healthy body, our red blood cells are free floating. They're bringing oxygen up to all of our major organs, our skin, you know, our brain, our heart, our lungs, our gut. free floating, bringing oxygen. When we look under a microscope after we've exposed ourselves to microwave radiation, in a lot of people, we see those free floating red blood cells start magnetizing together, right? It's an electromagnetic field. And then they start glomming together, and even the individual cells are not nicely formed. They're starting to look like bottle caps. And then they start magnetizing together. So you've got this glom of red blood cells that can no longer get to where they need to go to oxygenate our bodies. And then we get into something that the doctors will understand called ROS, or reactive oxygen species. And that sets us up for some pretty nasty things that are going to happen. There's also something going on with the voltage-gated calcium channels. So our cells whisper to each other electronically all the time. And when we overload ourselves with these man-made pulsations of microwaves, it dysregulates that communication from cell to cell. And it does something to what's called the voltage-gated calcium channels. We have these little openings and closings on these voltage gates that regulate things like calcium. When we get bombarded with microwaves, it disrupts that, and we get a bigger influx than we're supposed to of this leakage coming out of the cells now that causes this whole chemical reaction that produces something called peroxynitrite. And peroxynitrite is a really nasty free radical that will go in and glom on to wherever your weakest proclivity is. Maybe it's your brain, maybe it's your breast, maybe it's your testes. And then over time, we see all of this gunk building up, and we wind up with cancers, we wind up with diabetes, and all sorts of other fun things that we don't want to be investing in. Another mechanism of harm is that we have little antennas in the surface of our skin that help us to navigate our way through our world. They will tell us, is it too cold? Is it too hot? Go regulate your temperature and take care of yourself. When we bombard ourselves with these microwaves, we have a lot of people now talking about the hot ear. We have people talking about tingling and numbness in the skin. We hear about rashes and flushing. We cannot continue to overpower our biological systems with all this radiation. And then our heart is one of our major electric organs. That's why in our brain, that's why we do EEGs and EKGs to measure that electrical circuitry. And when we bombard ourselves, depending on your proclivity, your heartbeat might be going too fast. It might be going too slow now, or maybe you've got high blood pressure kicking in. We can't keep radiating ourselves. And the cognitive impairment, the anger and behavior issues that we see increasing, the anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation, again, epidemic levels even before the pandemic. So this is a new link that I just added to my slides today. The International Commission on the Biological Effects of Electromagnetic Fields has just this week put out a statement on electromagnetic hypersensitivity that we are in crisis. These are international experts, doctors, scientists, public health experts, ringing the alarm that we have a crisis on our hands. And when you go and look to see who sits on the board, you will see that these are the people at the top of their game all over the world telling us we need to do something about this. And as I mentioned earlier, it's not just you and I, it's every biological cell on the planet gets dysregulated by this man-made microwave radiation. And the good news is we've got really great resources to bring us quickly up to speed on this. Our friends at the Environmental Health Trust have just recently launched a new website called Wildlife, Wireless, and the Environment, and you can go look at the science there. But what it's telling us is that we are dysregulating the pollinators, the birds, the bees, the trees. All of it are heavily impacted, and all these disappearing species, like species disappearing by the dozens, we can't keep microwaving our environment and expect to have the Earth that we once had. For those concerned with climate change, back in 2012, there was a Greenpeace analyst who said, he crunched the numbers, said if the cloud were a country, it would be the 5th largest consumer of energy in the world. And that was in 2012. And look how much more has been pushed on us in the last 12 years. And Katie Singer is one of our colleagues, a journalist who has written incredible resources about the mineral extraction and the human atrocities, down, like places down in the Congo that go into getting the dozens of minerals that go into every single one of our devices. If we truly understood the human cost to that and the environmental cost, we would never just upgrade to the latest and greatest because it's got new bells and whistles that they're, giving us sexy ads on. We would use every single product to its full and useful life. And at that, make sure it gets recycled and repurposed so we don't have to keep raping our land and our population to extract these minerals. Data warehouses, networks, personal devices, all this streaming we've been pushed into every time we send and receive, charge and recharge our devices. And all those apps we've been talked into putting on our devices that we really honestly don't actually use very often. Once we know better, we can do better. Streaming consumes huge amounts of energy, as do all the data warehouses and the networks. And all those apps in the background are continuously doing updates and stuff. So let's commit to ourselves. Let's really look. What do we need versus what was just some, seductive thing that we got sucked into. And if you want to stream something on a device, download it first and then go into airplane mode. And then you can watch it without radiating yourself and without consuming all that additional energy, preferably on a device that is hardwired. And we're going to show you what that means. But literally, folks, it means go find all those Ethernet cables you have in a box somewhere, plug them back into the back of your router, and then just purchase the right adapter or dongle to hardwire, and then just go into your device and turn off all those antennas to protect you and everybody around you and to stop using so much energy. So as I was coming up to speed on this issue, we tend to be a very trustworthy species. And I kept thinking, surely if this is as bad as little me can figure out just by reading the science, somebody's got to have our backs on this, right? And then in 2015, Harvard Law School Center for Ethics, the Jaffra Center, came out with this incredible free report called Captured Agency: How the Federal Communications Commission is Dominated by the Industries it presumably regulates. And notice the graphic they put on their report. It's a revolving door. And that is exactly what has happened to most of our federal agencies today. They've been captured by industry, and they now put their own people in charge. And our government, by and large, is being run by the wireless industry, big pharma, big agri, fast food. These are the ones who are setting policy until we, the people, start learning about this, educating ourselves, our neighbors, our towns, and really start putting our civic action back into action. I've been up and down the chain of command for 10 years, and I am now convinced that although there are definitely still some good people up in our agencies, big change is not going to happen until we make it happen. So Captured Agency was my missing puzzle piece that said, whoa, okay, girl, get those knocking knees. You got to do something about this because nobody's coming to the rescue. There is no cavalry coming. And then more recently, ProPublica, a couple of years ago, put out a good article about how the FCC shields these cell phone companies from the safety issues. And remember when we said that 20 years ago, our own government completed a $30 million study that found clear evidence of cancer and DNA damage? Everybody who worked on those studies way back when have long since retired or passed away. And now the gentleman who's in charge of radiation control at the Food and Drug Administration is this Dr. Jeffrey Shuren. Well, when they completed that $30 million study that found clear evidence of harm, he went over to the FCC and said, let's not change the public radiation exposure limits. Let's just keep doing what we're doing. We don't believe that study. And one might ask, what would possess Dr. Shuren to do that? And again, you don't even have to look very far to find that Dr. Shuren is married to a partner in a law firm that represents big everybody, including big Wi-Fi. So we sadly have conflicts of interest all the way up the chain, all the way up to the World Health Organization. Unless you knew to look and where to look, how would you know that there are two groups at the WHO who focus on electromagnetic radio frequency radiation? One is heavily backed by industry, and they have a group, self-appointed, with no credible expertise on the biological effects. And then there's another group at the WHO who are the qualified scientists and doctors who are raising the red flag going, come on, we know this needs to be reclassified. Back in 2011, this radiation was classified as group 2B, possible human carcinogen. What was missing at the time were the animal studies. And now that we have the Ramazzini study and the National Toxicology study, we now know that this should be elevated to a known human carcinogen, or at least a probable human carcinogen, because when it hits those levels, they have to take action. But the industry has interest in keeping it suppressed down at the mid-level, where it's a possible human carcinogen. But now that those two groups have the science in hand, the WHO has reopened their investigation. But if you just go do a common search on the WHO and electromagnetic radiation, what comes up is stuff from years ago saying, gee, it's inconclusive. But here at this link, you can find the World Health Organization showing that they've reopened this investigation. We suspect that their investigation is going to get stacked with industry again, but they are saying we need to account for electromagnetic sensitivities. We need to account for children. We need to account for the elderly, for cancers, for infertility, and the environment. And nobody knows because it's not getting reported out in mainstream media that we need to be careful with this stuff. So that is all the bad news. Now let's focus on what is happening that's positive and what we have control over. So for every one of our devices, we have control over the antennas, right? And the way you do that is you go back to your router, you look at it and say, hey, cool, there's Ethernet ports. And then you go find your Ethernet cables. And if you have to buy some, look for ones that say shielded. We talked a little tiny bit about dirty electricity. What that means is that in all of our residential buildings, there's wires in the walls that run our electricity for us. And it's supposed to be a current that runs and cancels itself out. But if things are not done properly, there can be dirty electricity that's pulsating out of the walls that can come into your living space like 6 or 8 feet into the room from every one of the walls. So you're kind of in the middle sometimes, if it's not installed properly or grounded properly, of a very high man-made electromagnetic field that can hurt you. And for people who understand that or are already sick, they'll want to look for something called a shielded Ethernet cable. And that just means that inside the wire, inside the little, plastic thing, there's an aluminum or a metal shield around the wires so that dirty electricity can't pulse into the room. So it's just a little bit of an upgrade. It doesn't cost much more to get a shielded cable. And then by now, most of us have more than one device in our house that we would like to access safely. So look for something called an Ethernet switch. This one is what I have in my home. For like 20 bucks, you can plug in the main cable from your router into one port and then plug in a wire for each one of your separate devices into another port, and then just get the adapters that you might need if your device doesn't have a direct Ethernet connection to it. And then, so this is what it means to hardwire. You literally take wires and plug them in. And then the second step is you need to go into each device and identify all of your antennas And for my router, once I hardwired my home, I'm like, well, how do I make that thing stop transmitting? So I called up, I think I had Verizon at the time. And I said, so I'm choosing hardwiring, for the safety of my family, but I also understand it's much faster. The signal's far more reliable. My data's not being buckshot out into the air for any, ne'er-do-well out at the curb with $100 app that can snag my data as it goes by. These wires are much better protecting my safety, my data security, my privacy. So I said, how do I get that router to stop pulsating my family? Because I measured and it was off the charts all throughout my house. And they said, oh, that's easy. Sit down at your computer. And I went, really? And he said, yeah, sit down. I'm going to walk you into how to get into your online account, which he did. And then he showed me where the wireless settings were. So I clicked on that. And then I saw there was a 2.4 gigahertz antenna and a 5 gigahertz antenna in that box down in my utility closet. And so I just had to go off, and click the apply button. And I got a message saying, you're cutting everybody's Wi-Fi off. And I went, yes, thank you very much. And then I waited for it to dissipate. And then I went back down to my room in the basement and I measured that thing and literally radio silence. And it wasn't hard to do. It didn't cost me anything to turn that off. Later on, my husband saw a better deal with Comcast Xfinity and said, well, if we go with your better rates, my wife is going to want to make sure that after you swap out the cable boxes in our house and the router, that there's going to be no radiation. And they're like, yeah, no problem. So they come in with a Comcast router, and they were here for a couple hours. We had 3 different boxes in our house, and the guy says, okay, all done. And I said, all right, humor me. Come on back down. I just need to take a measurement. And we measured and it flew into the red zone again. I said, you turned off the 2.4 gigahertz antenna, right? And he said, yeah. I said, you turned off the 5 gigahertz antenna, right? And he said, yeah. And I said, and somebody tipped me off that Comcast is now putting hotspots on our home router using our electricity to throw signal out to the street for your customers to maintain a connection while they drive by, which should never be allowed because they're using our electricity. So I said, did you turn off the 2.4 gigahertz hotspot? And he said, I did. And I said, what about the 5 gigahertz hotspot? And he said, yeah, I turned that off too. And I said, so why is this sending my meter off the charts? And he said, I don't know. So he fiddled around, we tested again, still radiating. He called his supervisor, had no idea. So he said, well, I'm going to come back tomorrow with my supervisor. And I said, okay. And then when they were gone, I remembered at the first medical conference we had back in 2019, I sat down for lunch at a table that had a couple of the engineers sitting there. I think it was Jeremy Johnson and Peter Sullivan and maybe Rob Metzinger. And I was talking to somebody else at my end of the table, but I overheard somebody talking about this 5th antenna that's in there. So I reached out to Peter Sullivan and I said, Peter, what was that 5th antenna you guys were chatting about? And he said, oh, some of these companies are now putting an antenna in for a wireless home security system, and their help desk doesn't really know about it. He said, you're going to need to get to a tier 2 tech support person who from their end can turn off that antenna that's in your router at home. And I went, thank you. And then I thought, I don't want to play this game anymore, because what if they come in and turn it off? And then what if they do an update overnight and it turns everything back on? I can't control that. So my husband went down to the, tech store and bought our own router. It cost a couple $100, but you're paying for that router, the Wi-Fi stuff on your bill, maybe $10 a month. So I knew this would pay itself back in a year or two. So the next day when the techies came back to my house from Comcast, I said, I think I figured it out. It's the home security antenna, and your tech support doesn't know about it. You have to get to a tier 2 tech support person to speak to an engineer. So I was able to teach them what had to be done. And I said, as a show of good faith, would you gentlemen be so kind as to just swap out the routers for me? And they did. They were very nice and they were very grateful to know what was going on. So it's like playing whack-a-mole. Just when you think you got it, something else pops up. And that's why it's critically important to have a meter, because as much as we think we've got it nailed, these guys are putting multiple antennas in just about everything we buy today. So hardwire, turn off the antennas and measure. And then you can have some modicum of comfort to know that the things that are under your control, you can actually take care of. Okay. So that's your homework, right? And then there are some areas that you may or may not have control over. And we're going to talk about smart meters, cell towers, 5G small cells, and a little bit about satellites. So let's look at utility smart meters. What are those? When I was a little kid, I'm one of 10 children, and we played outside a lot. And one of our favorite games was hide and seek. So there little Cece would be hiding in the bushes, and to keep myself busy, I'd be watching the dials go around on the meters, the electric or the gas or the water meters. Today we have to think about solar and propane as well. But when we had those little dials going around on those old meters, those were called analog meters. It was just a strictly mechanical device that was hooked up to the house that would measure how much energy you were consuming for electric, gas, water, whatever. And then the town had somebody that would walk the neighborhoods and write down what your numbers were for that month, and then they would bill you. And those analog meters lasted like 40 or 50 years. Well, then along came innovation. And the industry started coming to our towns and saying, hey, we know you're paying those people to walk the neighborhoods. How would you like to save some money? If we get rid of those analog meters and replace them with a digital meter, then we can collect the signal wirelessly with the data that tells us how much energy you have consumed, and we can send the bills accordingly. And your town's going to save some money because you don't have to pay the walkers anymore. Well, what town wouldn't think that was a great idea? So most of our towns bought into these smart meters, or they're in transition right now. Why do we care? If you look on the meters, and I encourage everybody to go walk around your house, maybe you've got a gas meter outside, maybe you've got an electric meter outside, maybe you've got a water meter inside because you don't want the water freezing here in the Northeast and elsewhere. But go look at it. And if anywhere on that you see an FCC ID number, that's your tip that it's got a transmitter in it that's pulsating microwave radiation. And the industry will spin it that, oh, it just goes for a couple seconds a day. Well, when I was preparing to testify before the Massachusetts Department of Public Utilities, I took my meter and I sat down in my dining room against the wall where we've got 2 electric meters mounted, one for solar, one for a regular electric. And I sat there and I counted, how often does this thing pulse? I did the math, and it was pulsating at least 17,000 times microwave radiation into my home. So industry puts a lot of spin on their messaging. Remember, we talked about one of the properties of microwave radiation is it travels on metal. So what we've seen in some areas where things are not properly grounded is that these transmissions themselves can hop on the house wires and pipes and turn your home into one giant radiating antenna. And then we get far too many reports of power surges and fires and explosions and improper grounding. And you need to know that when you have an electrical fire, the fire department can't just show up and hose it down, because the guy or the gal holding that hose is going to get electrocuted as soon as it hits the water if the electricity is still on. So they have to contact the electric company. The electric company has to get into their systems and shut down all the electricity, get back to the fire department. This can take like up to an hour. And if you've got a windy day and this fire is raging, You can now be taken down your whole neighborhood. You can be taken down the exits from your neighborhood if there's fire and cars and people can't escape. This is a huge problem that the industry is choosing to ignore. And then there's the whole data harvesting and privacy issues. So with great thanks to Josh Hart at Stop Smart Meters, he has this brochure that shows, here's your house, here's your neighbors. Every time these digital signals go, they aggregate. So as we go down the line, the further down you are, the more radiation you're getting as all this data and signal comes through. And then it goes to an aggregation box somewhere. Heaven forbid your house is right next to that one. And they're sending off all the data to the electric company and others who may be taking that and selling your private information to third-party vendors who want to sell you product, because now they know your patterns, they know what kind of devices you've got in your homes. It's all there. I don't want anybody knowing my stuff. If I want them to know, I'll tell them. But they have no right to take that information. And then there's the whole national security and all the nefarious things that can happen when people have your data. And at the EMF Medical Conference, they said this was one of the causes of sudden onset microwave sickness. When these smart meters get installed and people have no idea, they might be sleeping next to it. It might have contaminated the whole house with radiation or dirty electricity. It's a big environmental justice issue. Here in Worcester, Massachusetts, National Grid came in and said, oh, we're going to upgrade the infrastructure. It's going to be great. We're going to save everybody money. Well, none of that happened. When they did their pilot here, they went way over their budget. They wanted to turn around and have the ratepayers pay for their miscalculations in their accounting. And our Attorney General's office got involved because of the economic criminality on this. But they also, any of these big polluters are prone to going into environmental justice communities where people are working, multiple jobs just to keep a roof over the head, food on the table. They're not tuned into what's going on in their community. And then they deploy these toxic products and say, hey, it was such a success in this town, we're going to roll it out all across the state. And hey, New York and Connecticut and Rhode Island, look at how successful we are in Massachusetts. You guys are behind the times, man, get with it. And this is how they operate. So this is a huge environmental justice issue. And there's 2 excellent TED Talks from highly credentialed professionals. Jeremy Johnson was a Silicon Valley engineer, and he is now a consultant in this field to help people. You can hire him. You can send 4 questions to him that he'll answer. You can hire him for a half an hour or an hour, and he'll walk you through, whatever issues you're experiencing. He did a really good TED Talk on this. And then Dr. Alexia McKnight is a medical doctor, ironically a radiologist, and she's a veterinarian, and I think her specialty is large animals. So she deals with microwave radiation for her living and had no idea that these non-thermal, low-level, man-made pulsations of wireless radiation were harmful until a smart meter got installed on her home. And she didn't know about it right away. It wasn't until that smart meter malfunctioned that all these crazy symptoms that came up so suddenly went away. And then a couple of weeks later, they put this device, another one on her house, and all these symptoms came back: the headaches, the anxiety, the depression, the brain impact, to the point where she was out in traffic with her daughter in the car. She could no longer make the neural connections. Does that green light mean stop or go? And thank goodness Dr. McKnight made the right choice and got home safely that day. But that was when she started making the connection that her symptoms really went haywire when those smart meters were installed. And she has a really good TED Talk there. So then there's the cell towers that started out in industrial parks 300 feet up in the air, and then they started encroaching closer and closer and closer. And the industry says, hey, if we can paint it the same color as your building, we can slap them up right on your buildings, right up on your rooftops or the sides of the buildings, so long as it's aesthetically pleasing. And now we have a lot of communities getting sick because of these close range cell towers. So it's critically important to look at the non-industry funded science, because we know industry creates their own under conditions that would show no harm. And then there's a website called antennasearch.com. Here in the US, you can pop in any address and it will give you a return of how many of these cell towers and how many of these macro big antennas are installed within a 3-mile radius. There's a couple few hundred around my home address. And then I put in the State House address in Boston, where we go in for our hearings and where all of our legislators work. There were more than 1,500 macro cell towers with more than 4,500 of these giant antennas installed right in downtown Boston. And this is what most of our major cities and towns are looking like these days. It's just electro pollution like you wouldn't believe, because you can't see it. So this is my research repository that I called Understanding EMFs, because I didn't understand what electromagnetic fields were. So being a tech writer, I just started collecting important resources that I wanted to be able to revisit and then share with others. So you're welcome to go to my research repository, Understanding EMFs, and I've got a lot of the science lined up for you here. So those are the macro towers that have encroached into our homes. You know, some are showing up right inside neighborhoods. And now what's left to monetize, so 3G and 4G and all of its prior generations use these long wavelengths that are capable of getting through every object out there, including our biological bodies. Now what's left to monetize are these tiny little millimeter waves. And what the industry is doing is saying that 5G or 5th generation technology is going to bring us smart cities, super highways, really fast entertainment download speeds, right? Well, if you go take a peek at who owns the entertainment industry, guess who's buying that up now? Big Wi-Fi, because that's a new revenue stream for them. So they keep pushing streaming faster and faster. Our friends at TechSafe Hawaii have done a nice little 5 or 6 minute video on here that will help you learn what 5G is and isn't. But in addition to these 4 and 5 or 3 and 4G wavelengths, they want to do these new millimeter waves, and they can't go through objects like trees and buildings and snow. So their solution is to bundle it all together. So you've got all these different frequencies together. And they want to put, and they've already begun putting 5G small cell radiating antennas at bedroom height every 2 to 12 houses inside our neighborhoods, unless we learn what to do. And if you go to my talks that I do with WCCA TV with my Tech Safe program, you'll hear from a woman named Mary Bacon from Minneapolis. And she and her neighbors organized and just stood there at the curb and said, no, thank you. When the trucks started showing up, we don't want them here. And the police, through higher and higher levels of police authority, they kept coming back, and the industry kept calling the cops. And the cops stood behind the citizens and said, they have a right to peaceful assembly. We can't force them to leave. And one of the industry guys actually leaned in and said, keep doing what you're doing, because we can't put these poles up if there's a fall danger to a car or a person in the vicinity. So here we go. It comes back to grassroots, and we have to stand up for what we want to protect. And they come in and they clear cut the trees to get these dinky little millimeter waves through at a time when our cities are trying to grow the tree canopy to protect ourselves from the climate change heat escalations that we're seeing. So 5G just makes no sense on so many levels. And in this little clip from the congressional hearing, we hear Congressman Richard Blumenthal in Washington, D.C. from Connecticut asking these industry kingpins, so tell us, how much money have you invested to make sure 5G was safe with independent science before you brought it to market, and they hominid. And ultimately, in this clip from our friends at the Environmental Health Trust, you hear them say, well, we don't actually know of any science that was done. So it's a big joke, and the joke's on us because we've allowed it to happen. And even the folks who report on tech are saying 5G is a bad joke. It's not even delivering faster speeds than what we already had access to with 4G, which was not safe to begin with, right? So this is a project. If you want to purchase one of these meters and you want to do a little bit of investigation in your own community, Dr. Magda Havas, who's the co-chair of that EMF medical conference, she taught EMFs at Trent University up in Canada for years. And in her retirement now, she's got this global EMF monitoring project that she calls her BRAG project. Can you brag about the radiation in your community? Or is it in the black? B is for black, R is for red, A is for amber, and G is for green. In the scientific literature, they figure even if we could get it down to 1,000 microwatts per square meter outdoors, if we've got a clean environment in which to do detox during our sleep, then we might be semi-okay, although there is no safe level of this radiation in the scientific literature. So if you wanted to tune into her protocols, you could help Dr. Havas's project and sign up with her. If you haven't yet purchased the Safe and Sound Pro 2, she can give you a code that will give you a discount. When I did it, it was like a 20 or 25% discount. It saved me about $100 on that meter. So please join us to be citizen scientists. It doesn't mean you have to be a real scientist, but you can follow her protocol and put your data into her database, because our governments are not measuring this. And this is what some of the towns in New Hampshire, when we were measuring that, look like. It's bad. It's bad. And then here in the North End in Boston, which is a big tourist draw where all of our wonderful Italian restaurants and bakeries are, you can see that the storefronts are on the first floor, but then there's housing up above. And these beautiful wrought iron lamps, these are actually cell towers. They have 5G cell antennas in there. And as you go down Hanover Street, which is the main drag, you see these at the curb right outside people's homes and businesses. And then when you look down the side street, they cheaped out because they'll always take the path of least resistance and highest profitability. They didn't put these pretty ones there. They put these ugly gray monopoles right outside people's bedroom windows. So that's all the bad news. As Martin Luther King Jr. taught us, when we have meaningful change finally in our society, it comes through 3 channels. 1, the public learns and gets engaged, and that's what we're hoping to inspire today. 2, it goes through the courts, and the guilty are eventually held accountable, which is the wireless industry. And 3, the public policy finally catches up, in this case to the science, and we get protections put in place. So I will leave you with my slides. I will send them out to everybody who registered, and I'm going to whip through some of the high points, and you're welcome to go dive in more deeply on your own time later. So just know that the Environmental Health Trust and Children's Health Defense, which is the organization that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. founded, he has been suing environmental polluters for decades. That's what he does. He knows the politics, he knows the players, and he knows how to frame this up. And they took the industry, the FCC, to court and won. And the court found that the Federal Communications Commission was arbitrary and capricious in reaffirming their public radiation limits that allow this much, when in the public record, there were 11,000 pages of evidence of harm filed that show biological effects at hundreds of thousands of times below that. And when I looked up what is arbitrary and capricious, what does that mean? It means they made it up. They didn't do their homework. They didn't look at the public record, and they did not make a balanced decision based on fact. They just stayed and protected our captured agencies and industry. And so the courts ordered
Tomorrow.
the courts.
I sent them a note. I haven't heard back from them.
Can you please mute? Thank you. So yeah, the courts ordered the FCC to reassess their public radiation exposure limits and account for the vulnerabilities to children, to the elderly, to, infertility, to the environment, electromagnetic sensitivities. And in August, it will be 3 years and the FCC has done nothing. And the court didn't give them a deadline. So here we are, still polluting our environment. And now we're launching all these satellites for 5G that are beamforming signal down to the ground, going through whatever to get to those 5G devices. So lots of lawsuits have been happening. There's a big one here in Pittsfield, Massachusetts. For the first time in the United States, a board of health investigated, determined that this was causal, that the cell tower that was illegally sited on top of a neighborhood caused children and adults to have to abandon their home, caused the pollinators to disappear. And Verizon went to the court and got an injunction saying, oh no, we think we're protected. And so with Children's Health Defense help, they came back and have gotten a civil lawsuit going, and we're waiting for the judge to say if they will remove that injunction from Verizon and let the Board of Health do their job. And industry knows these lawsuits are coming. They've set aside billions, we've heard, because it's all in the name of progress, all the cost of doing business, just like big tobacco, only far more insidious. So there's a lot happening and you guys can investigate that. And then we talked a bit about the policy and how we helped New Hampshire become the first in the nation to pass a law to investigate. And in their bill, they said, we need answers. Why do Lloyd's of London, Swiss Re, and others long since recognize this as a world-leading risk and put exclusions in their policies? That can leave our towns very vulnerable to legal liability. And then we talked about that fine print. Why does that even exist? Why is the FCC ignoring thousands of studies? Why is the FCC only talking about thermal effects when the science is showing great harm at the non-thermal, non-ionizing, low levels of man-made radiation? And why do we still allow 100 times more radiation exposure than other countries? And why is nobody accounting for the cumulative effect? Our guidelines are only set on one device, and we have children in classrooms with 30 devices, with wireless access points, with smart boards, with personal devices, with cell phones, all pulsating all at once, and we're ignoring it. So we got that law passed in less than a month in New Hampshire, passed the Joint Committee, or passed the House Committee on Science, Tech, and Energy, passed the Senate Committee on Health and Human Services under the governor's pen, signed into law to investigate in less than 7 months. We've had bills here in Massachusetts for a decade, and we've done nothing meaningful. So they spent a year in New Hampshire. They formed this commission. They got world-leading experts to testify. They pulled the industry in and gave them 2 seats at the table so that everybody has to put their cards on the table. And at the end of the day, they came out with this groundbreaking report. 13 commissioners, they voted 10-3 to support the recommendations to transition away from wireless for primary connectivity, bring fiber optics or high-speed cable and copper to the premises, and then just hook up indoors with wires again. 10-3. The 3 who voted against these recommendations, 2 were from the industry, 1 at the state level and 1 at the national level. And then there was 1 Senator Gray who sided with industry. So Dr. Kent Chamberlain from the University of New Hampshire's Department of Computer and Electrical Engineering, he served on that commission and he did a complete 180. He thought, of course, it must be fine. He had been working on engineering solutions for medical devices for decades. He thought it must be fine until he read the science. And now he's retired, and now he has just taken the leadership position at the Environmental Health Trust, and he lectures all over the world on how we need to be doing this right And we do have engineering solutions we should be pursuing. And he's working with industry on those as well. So lots of good stuff happening, but every time we took one of those or two or three of those recommendations from their report and tried to get them enacted into law, industry came in and shut us down. So we can't wait. There is no cavalry coming as long as the industry has the upper hand. And important things like Frank Clegg from Microsoft Canada. Here's his spoken testimony that is now in written form that you can give to people to say, wow, an industry leader is saying, turn the truck around. This is not healthy. So use these resources that you'll receive in my slides. And then there's bills all over the country on this, but we don't hear about it in mainstream media. We still have 2 bills that we're hoping to find out about. Actually, their deadline for our smart meter bill and our commission bill are today. So we're waiting for that to come out. But please know, we have samples here you can use. Let's get electromagnetic sensitivity put into the databases where we track how many sick people there are. Just like we track with COVID or food poisoning or Parkinson's, we need to start tracking this disease. We need to improve our civil rights bills at the state level. We need to get those smart meters taken off of our homes, or at least as a starting point, give us the right to opt out without charging us, and protect the kids in schools, protect them from handheld devices. So lots of bills that you can go look at. And then lots of examples. The industry rolls into town and says, oh, those people who are just saying stuff, those are just the NIMBYs. They just don't want it in their backyard. Nobody else cares. Well, that is another one of their points of disinformation. There are more than 150 groups formed all over the US, and you can go to this link at our friends at Americans for Responsible Technology, and you will find perhaps a group that you can join. And if not, they've got a toolkit there for you on how to start a group, and lots of resources to meaningfully take this conversation beyond the walls of your own home. So lots of people are doing it and making really good inroads, which I'll leave you guys to look at. Public servants are learning about this and stopping 5G in their towns. So if we don't bring it to them, they're not going to know, but you've got great resources in these slides. Now, next month, in the month of August and into September, we're going to concentrate our education efforts on protecting the children in schools, because we should not be sending them back into classrooms with high levels of microwave radiation. I went to the open house of our new elementary school with my radio frequency detection meter and my iPhone in airplane mode, and I took 1-minute clips of what the radiation looks like. Outside, it was in the green. It was great. Every single area of that school, from the gymnasium to the classrooms to the special rooms like art and music and tech, the library, bad, bad, bad. And they have way oversold. So now they put a wireless access point in the ceiling of every single classroom, all the hallways, right outside the principal's office, everywhere, way oversold. I have a colleague in Ireland who used to roll these out to the schools. You could power the entire school with just a couple of these access points, but it's more money for the industry if you put them everywhere. And I know of schools where they have multiple ones in the ceiling of a single classroom. So we just need to keep getting educated. Dr. Holly Grow down in Louisiana pulled her colleagues together about excessive screen time and how being in front of screens is causing an epidemic of myopia, because we should be scanning the horizon with our eyeballs. That's what keeps them properly shaped. Now we're distorting them to be oblong because we're only looking in the short term. So many good resources here. Other countries are already taking tech out of the classroom because we're not getting better education outcomes. Silicon Valley, they're having their nannies sign contracts that there will be no screens around their kids. And here we go. Our friends who have Americans for Responsible Technology also have Tech Safe Schools. They've got a whole toolkit. They will send information to your schools if you reach out to them to empower you to start that conversation. We say, don't go it alone. You might be right, but you're one voice that can easily be swept under the rug. We're going to give you some resources to get a lot more people around you educated before you go and try and talk to the authorities. We have curriculum, we have professional development, we have an online training course. We've got it all, guys. So we're going to talk more about that next month in much more depth. But for all of our professions, look at all these amazing resources. Textbooks already exist. We have Physicians for Safe Technology, a highly credible website. We have the medical conference at no charge. We know how to help train all of our engineers and so on. It's all there. So what do? Some people are do-it-yourselfers, grabbing these wires and plugging them back in and figuring out what adapter you need, turning off the antennas. Not rocket science, easy peasy. For some people, it's like, oh my God, I can't do that. That's way beyond me. So there are experts you can hire to bring in. There's an entire profession called building biologists who are highly trained consultants that can come in and not only measure for the electromagnetic fields, but many of them are also certified to check for mold, VOCs, formaldehyde, water pollutants, air pollutants. So know that you don't have to do this alone. And then let's keep learning. Who knew? There's already 2 episodes on PBS with Bert Wolf and his travel show. This film, Generation Zapped, has helped so many people. It's available through our library streaming services of Canopy and Hoopla, and it's available through many other streaming services, although Amazon Prime just censored it here in the US. But let's learn. That's a great one to sit down with the older kids. We actually did a lot of screenings in libraries around Massachusetts, down at the National Institutes of Health, and in other states. And there were children who were brought in with their parents, like upper elementary kids. And I was a little nervous about the kids. And at the end, I said, so kids, what do you think? And they're sitting on their parents' lap by now because it's the end of the evening. And they just looked at me and went, hardwire. So if the kids can get it, we can face our addictions to technology and we can sort it out. And I don't use that word lightly. These microwaves are literally hitting the same receptors in our central nervous system and brain that drugs and alcohol and pornography and gambling and tobacco are hitting. So we really need to take a pause and find the courage to start with baby steps and start backing away towards safe technology. So they do have this whole toolkit for us at Americans for Responsible Technology. And then when we take care of our stuff and start talking to our towns, we should know that the Centers for Disease Control, the CDC, already has the ALARA principle, which means we need to get to as low as reasonably achievable with any kind of radiation exposure. They haven't fessed up yet that you need to do the ionizing and the non-ionizing, but they know. And so when our towns investigate, I have a page in my research repository, and all these pages in my research repository are available at Massachusetts for Safe Technology on our resources page. So, if you just go to Mass for Safe Tech, you'll find it there. And my last slide will leave you with the link for that. But we wanted to put ourselves in the shoes of our municipal leaders. What are they up against? What does this look like for them? And how can we help them? So lots of resources, but we always have to circle back and say, don't march to the levels that the industry and the FCC are telling us, because they were never biologically safety tested. We have to go by the building biology limits, and we know what those are here. And always measure, because if we don't, it can be right around us, and tomorrow a new one can come in and we have no idea. So next steps. We can't kid ourselves. There's no safe level of man-made radiation. Dr. Linda Birnbaum, who's now retired, she headed up the National Institutes of Environmental Health Sciences. She indeed said, yeah, we've got a lot of captured agencies, but we do still have some really good people in our government. But it's got to come up from below. We have to speak up to empower our states. And so we will commit to continuing these educational webinars every month to help you learn. And just go to our events page at Mass for Safe Tech, grab the latest, and start posting it up around your community. Put it in your library bulletin board, put it in your town hall, take it down to the senior center, to the rec center, put it up at work. Nobody else is going to know unless we lend a helping hand. And then I can be brought in to do forums. We've done a lot of regional forums where towns will come together and learn. Here's a couple that you can refer to there. And then start where you are. What do you do? Are you a parent who's home? Let's get the other parents together. Let's get them educated. Are you a professional? Are you a medical practitioner? Are you an engineer? Let's start speaking. And public speaking is my happy place. So their organizations are almost always looking for speakers. So if you can credibly introduce this topic and put them in touch with me, I would be more than honored to be brought in as a speaker for the regional or national or quarterly or annual meetings. I love doing this stuff. So next steps, our towns really need to start forming tech safety committees because tech is here to stay. Burlington did a really good job with that here in Massachusetts. They need to be encouraged to make sure when industry comes knocking that they secure a no-fee opt-out on these smart meters or tell them, no, thank you. We're happy to stick with our analog meters and provide jobs for the walkers in our community. We need to start moving away from wireless in our communities. And the way a lot of this is done is through our zoning code and our local bylaws. Our friends at Americans for Responsible Technology have a great toolkit to help teach our towns what the gaps are, have them look at their own zoning code because every town does it differently, and then hire a good attorney who understands what the industry is up to. Andrew Campanelli is one. He used to work for the industry until he figured out the harm, and then he switched teams, and now he can be hired to come into your town to look at your particular zoning code, look at your state code. He knows the inside out of the federal legislation, and he can help you for about $8,500. Your town can rewrite their zoning code to make it as strong as legally possible under current law. So this is not something to skimp on because the industry is going town by town and starting to put cell towers and 5G small cell antennas far too close to our homes, our schools, our rec fields, and places of worship and medical facilities. So we have everything we need. We know this is like drinking water out of a fire hose, so we apologize for that, but better to know, because once you're there, or once you know you're 50% of the way there, now you just need to pluck up the courage to start learning and making changes. So for today, think about where are your exposures and what are maybe one or two baby steps that you can take right now and still have tech, but maybe not as much radiation. Think how you can create that sleep sanctuary to let your body cell repair at night, and then gradually make your way to the Ethernet cables and adapters. And today you can just start turning off all those antennas that you're not using in this moment, and that will start reducing your exposure. So choose airplane mode. You can set alarms on your phone to go off every half hour, turn it out of airplane mode, upload, download, go right back into airplane mode, then pick up your device and compose your responses to your texts and your emails, and you've reduced your exposure greatly. An Environmental Health Trust has all these incredible one-pagers, two-pagers, postcards, things for your doctors that you can just print out and start circulating or send by email. So thank you, everybody. I know that's 2 hours of a lot of information, but we'll send you my slides in the recording, and then you can know what to do and digest it on your own time. A lot of people will make a small change, come back, listen a little more, pluck up the courage to do something more. And this is how we move the needle towards safe technology. So thank you so much for being so attentive. I know we had said we'll be a 2-hour webinar today, but for those who want to stay, I can stay a little bit longer and do Q&A. Kevin, I don't know if you can stay a little bit longer to co-host with us.
I actually have a meeting right now that I need to run to.
Okay,
But I
that's
tried
fine.
I tried to stay up with the chat, so there was quite a bit of information in the chat. So I
Okay.
think we tried to answer all those questions best we could. So,
Okay, thank
And
you
I
and
can
so
everybody
stay on.
much.
everybody agreed that you
I
rock.
can stay on too.
Okay, thank you very much. So Kevin, feel free to drop off, and I will just open it up now. I will go into gallery view, and anybody who would like to raise their hand, feel free, and we'll spend the next couple of minutes going through questions and answers.
Cece, I don't know if there's a raise hand function right
That's
now.
okay. I see your hand, Deb.
Yeah,
Go
you
ahead.
So, may I take my turn then? Okay. So you can maybe see I'm in a private study room at a library in Scarborough, Maine, right at the moment. And as I've told you, and I just want to share real quick with others who I haven't spoken to before, as someone right now who is without fixed address, in part due to all of this crazy disability, then I've been needing to find libraries where I can perch with my laptop and use their Ethernet. And it's been actually a pretty amazing experience because most librarians don't know that they have the Ethernet available. But as soon as you get them asking the IT person to find it, we find it. And sometimes they're actually activating it for me when it was deactivated.
Wow.
And what I'm doing is I'm giving every single library, I'm bringing the 4-pager that you created with the EMF points of confusion versus fact, which includes the symptom chart. And so they have been really gracious and kind, because I'm mostly in Maine and New Hampshire, I will point out, not Massachusetts. But
Well,
there
I
are a
know
few
you
in
started here and you've been chasing your tail to try and find safe living.
Yeah,
And I also want to add that Deb has been doing a lot of research into tiny home communities.
Yeah.
And would love to establish one that is both supportive of those with electrical sensitivities as well as multiple chemical sensitivities.
yes.
So if you or a loved one fall into those categories, or if you know angel investors who want to see solutions brought forward, we can put you in touch with Deb. So please don't hesitate to
And I'll
reach.
pop my email into the chat. So
Okay,
the
great.
other separate question I have, because I am going to need interim housing, and it looks like my 89-year-old dad and I might be roommates because he's getting kicked out of the nursing home and girlfriend isn't letting him come home. But as I look, could you just clarify for me, because we may need to stay in Massachusetts for now. As far as the smart meters, I looked on your website, CC. Is it true that it's saying National Grid offers an opt-out at a cost
Mhm.
for the electric smart meters and also for the gas meters, but Eversource does not offer an opt-out?
Correct.
Okay, so that what I want to do is then go to a town that has National Grid, or in the town that I used to be in, South Hadley, we had our own electric company.
Yeah, and some towns do run their own utilities, so
So I just want to make sure that information seems to be mostly.
that's my understanding today. And today is actually the day that the Joint Committee on Telecommunications, Utilities, and Energy is supposed to be reporting out on our smart meter opt-out bill. So
Okay.
we cross our fingers, we don't hold our breath because we know industry has a very strong foothold in Massachusetts, but we keep trying. So Deb, good luck.
Thank
Keep in
you
touch.
so
Let us
much.
know
And
if
I'm
you
going to
have anything.
share my email in the chat.
So for anybody who's never kept the chat before, if you're in the chat window and you look down at the bottom, on mine, I see a little button on the bottom right with the 3 little dots, the ellipse. If you click on that, it will give you the option to save the chat to your computer. So if there's anything in there you want to hold on to, like Deb's email address, you're more than welcome to. All right, Carl, go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
Hi, yeah, just wanted to know, I joined late. I was dropping off my daughter at the airport, but anyhow, have you talked at all about the Empower movement folks that are doing initiatives?
Yeah, I have not talked about that in this. That's Josh Del Sol and Cal Washington. And
It's really just Cal Washington. Josh Del Sol is kind of separated from it or doing other things.
Yeah. So some people have had some luck with it. Legally, I don't know if it is able to stand up in the courts. So I haven't gone very deep into that, but if you know others who have had clear successes, and sometimes it does, it scares crooked, municipal leaders away. So yeah, folks are
Well-
welcome to go out and look at the Empower movement and see if that's something they might like to try.
Yeah, so just for the folks that might be listening, there are several areas that are of interest to you and everybody on is they have a 5G notice of liability, way to go, move forward, smart meters, chemtrails, which are just starting, or geoengineering as it's called, and there's a fourth one, oh, COVID shots, but that's not so generic to this group, but nonetheless, I am in the fourth round of sending my notices of liability to Eversource. And so I've sent them to the CEO, Nolan, to the Connecticut, distribution leader, that would be Steve Sullivan, and then to the Pura commissioner, whatever her name is, can't think of her
That's
name.
great. Are you getting any responses?
The only response I've gotten so far from Eversource basically says that, oh, I don't have a smart meter. I mean,
Do you
these
have a
are-
digital meter on your home?
I absolutely have a digital meter on my home, and it's absolutely radiating every 15 seconds or so. I've had
Right.
a building biologist come and measure it. We've sent them reports. They don't seem to read English, so they've had a great deal of time reading English and understand what they actually put on my house. So it's a little frustrating.
It's very frustrating and they play these games with you. But do let us know how you make out with that. And if you succeed, we'd love to hear
Well,
more.
Here's what really I think is more important than me succeeding. It's a lot of people hitting these various, when you get one of these, they probably just ignore it. But when they probably get 20, 30, 40, then they go, their goose is cooked. So I think it's really important if anybody's interested, reach out to me and I'll give you the information for Empower Movement. It's a great support group, and if it works, fantastic. If it doesn't, then you've learned about some things about our system that you would have never known about the merchant law and how really court systems are not set up to fairly adjudicate for you and me.
Yeah.
They're set up to fairly adjudicate for those in the know. And so we're all kind of operating, in the blind until you know what you know. And I think most of us don't know. But in either case, I think just it's a numbers game. And again, and I'm sending out
It's absolutely a numbers game. The legislature is a numbers game. The federal level is a numbers game. So until enough citizens get informed, so we really encourage you to, have screenings of Generation Zapped in your home or in your local library and really get people informed. And then once you have a larger group of people, then you might get others to listen. I make that same advice for speaking to the schools. Don't go it alone. So start local, Carl.
Right, I'm sending out my first billing for $630,000. And at $10,000 a day for them leaving their smart meters on, it's going to be quite considerable, at some point, because basically there's a tacit agreement when you fail to respond to a contract, in the sense that they've already got an open contract with us. Anyhow, there's a lot to it.
I love the idea of it. I just haven't seen it work as effectively as I think they want it to.
Right.
But every day's a new day. Maybe today's the day we hit the tipping point. So do come back again and tell us how you make out.
All right, great.
Carl. Thank you so much for sharing the Empower movement. Okay, any other questions before we go today? All right, everybody. Well, listen, thanks for joining us. Come back again and keep an eye out for the recording. And I hope to get that out by tomorrow-ish. Okay, everybody. Take care. Have a tech safe day.
So much, Cece. You're an angel.
You're welcome, darling.
God bless.
Thank you, Cece. Bye-bye.
You're so welcome, Arlene. And thank you for being our co-host this month and sharing your story with us. And for just taking the high road on all of this. And we've had some lovely conversations about just counting your blessings and doing the very best that you can every day.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, we will make inroads. We are.
We
You just
are.
have to be persistent. Yeah, I
Yes.
agree. Thanks for all you do.
All right, everybody, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.